You don't want to divert the train away from that track. But at some point, it's like, well, does this game need more time? Yes. You come to another branch. So do we be quiet about that and continue as we are? Or do we raise this and see if there's something we can do about it? It's uncomfortable, but so what, in a way, in development? You just have to do what's right each step of the way, and then hopefully you can work things out.
Once upon a time, there was a young game developer called James who travelled to a faraway land. It was a land very different to his own. The trains ran on time, and the shops played Auld Lang Syne at closing time every day of the year. Some years later, after learning much, James returned to his home with a dream of making a video game called the Plucky Squire. And he's here to talk to us about it today. Hello, James Turner, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. You're making me nostalgic for that faraway land.
By the time people see this, they'll be able to get their hands on the game. We're actually talking just a little bit before that. Must be a strange sort of time for you. How are you feeling?
Yeah, well, excited for sure. It is very odd. It's something that has been far away in the distance for like 4 years now. And you know how time goes. Something seems very far away, and then suddenly it's there, and suddenly it's in the back view mirror. It's weird how that works. And now we're on the verge of that actually happening. So yeah, excited. And the nature of our work has changed so much. Like a couple of months ago, we were fully in development mode, heads down, just making it the best we possibly could. Then we shifted to bug fixing mode, where we're just playing the game constantly over and over again, trying to find all those bugs and fix those. And now we're kind of in a weird bit of a limbo mode, just waiting for the game to launch, doing a few interviews. I'm drawing like promotional artwork to post on social media, that kind of thing. So the nature of work is changing, and then we've got this release date like tomorrow. So it's all a bit unfamiliar and kind of interesting, but exciting at the same time.
Yeah, sounds like there's still a lot going on in the background there, even though you're sort of on the eve of the release. And definitely want to talk a bit more about, those 4 years and the way you've been working on the Plucky Squire. But probably be a good place to start. I think a lot of people will have a bit of an idea about this, so maybe don't need to dwell on it. But just you have been working in the games industry for a good while now. Had quite an interesting career by a lot of people's standards, I would say. Could you just give us a rundown of your sort of history?
In university, I studied computer graphics, which allowed me to put together a portfolio. Then I sent out the portfolio and I got a couple of job interviews. One of them was in London at a games company called Blue 52, which is my first games industry job. I thought living in London would be kind of fun and exciting, so that's what I did. And I worked there for 2 years, which is where I met the co-director of the studio, Jonathan Biddle, aka Bids. And while I was there, I went on a holiday to Japan. And while I was in Japan, my Japanese friend, said, why don't we send your portfolio around to different Japanese studios? So that's what we did. And that resulted in me having an interview at a company called Genius Sonority, who were looking for 3D artists as they were about to start off production on a game called Pokemon Colosseum, which was like a big kind of like spin-off version of Pokemon on home consoles. There was Stadium before, and Colosseum was going to be more of an RPG, and they were looking for 3D artists, and that's where my portfolio caught their eye. And then the interview was quite awkward because I didn't speak Japanese. My friend was sat next to me kind of interpreting. The good thing about being an artist is that your work can speak for itself. And as long as you're not completely mad or strange, then, you have a chance at getting a job. And luckily it turned out that was the case. They offered me the job there. And then I was moving to Japan the next month to work on Pokemon Colosseum. And then from there, it was working on more Pokemon games, Pokemon XD. I became the art director of Pokemon Troze, which was like a puzzle game, art director of Pokemon Battle Revolution. And then Game Freak, who were doing the mainstream Pokemon games, they, like what I was doing on the spin-off games, caught their eye. And they offered me a job in their company, in their studio. And that's when I made the move to Game Freak and started working on the mainstream Pokemon games like Pokemon Black and White, Sun and Moon, X and Y. Eventually, I became the art director of Pokemon Sword and Shield. and I was designing lots of Pokemon in that time period, like lots of creature designs, which was really fun. So it was a really good experience.
Yeah, that's a real kind of fairy tale arc. I'm sure lots of people sort of hear that are quite envious, and also means that there's probably millions of people who are familiar with your work already. But I think it was about 18 years you spent in Japan, and then you.
That's right.
What made you decide to come back to the UK? Was it just felt as you'd gone as far as you could with Pokemon?
Well, it was a number of things. I mean, I loved working at Game Freak. The people there are great, and I still have friends there. And it was just a very satisfying job. Like you say, it's people's dream job to be doing that kind of thing, and really fun. But I always had an interest in doing original games, which is why when I was at Game Freak, I would occasionally direct an original game. There was one for the 3DS called Harmonite, which was like a rhythm platform game, and one for Steam and PlayStation and Xbox, I think, called Tembo, Tembo the Badass Elephant, which was like a platform game. So I was always kind of hopping between doing something original and then doing something in the Pokemon universe. Creating a studio was something that I'd always wanted to do, and talked with Bids, the person I worked with all those years ago in London. We talked about creating our own studio, which is like really from zero. You get to define your entire game, you get to define within reason what the schedule is and like what kind of how you're going to approach the project. And so I could see working on the next Pokemon game and the next Pokemon game, which would be great, but I kind of wanted to do this different thing, which would require really, if we wanted to create our own studio, require leaving Game Freak. And it just so happened my son was born around that time, and we were thinking like, where do we want him to go to school? Shall we try like living in England, see what that's like? And the kind of the private and the professional kind of lined up, and Bids was all in for creating a studio at that time. And so the stars aligned and we founded All Possible Futures.
Out of that grew the Plucky Squire. Just describe the game for anybody who maybe hasn't seen it, and maybe just if you could tell us a little bit about kind of how it came into being would be interesting to hear as well.
Yeah, so it's a game that takes place in a book, in that you're the hero of a fairy tale that takes place in a book, and you can walk around the pages, and then when you get to the edge of the page turns, and then you go to the next page, which is a different area, and that's how you progress through this land. You're the great hero that everybody loves, and you're like acclaimed, but there's a villain who's always getting beaten by the hero over and over again, and he's become incredibly frustrated by this, and he wants to be the main character of this book. And because he's a sorcerer, he finds a way to transport things in and out of the book, and he uses this magic to push you, the hero Jot, his name is Jot, out of the book and into the 3D land of a desk. And this desk is actually in a room which belongs to a boy who is the owner of the book. So there's like a 9-year-old boy called Sam who owns the book, and you realize that you're actually just a character in this book. But even though you're a part of this book, your world is still just as important as the outside world. There are still dangers and risks within that world. And so you have to try and save your land from this evil sorcerer by adventuring in and out of the book. And it's an action adventure. So when you're in the book, it's something a bit like a top-down Zelda kind of style. And then when you're out of the book, it's more like a 3D platformer, where you're kind of jumping over oversized objects and like over pencils and pens and that kind of thing. And then we change things up with mini games, like you'll be walking along and encounter like a big enemy, a honey badger, and then suddenly you'll have to box this badger, and the page will turn and you'll be in like a punch out kind of mini game. And so we like to keep things very surprising and keep the player on their toes that way. I was trying to think of a game idea, and I'd been drawing these images on social media in a very simple kind of minimalist style. kind of colorful flat colors and thick black outlines. And I was thinking, is there a way to use this art style in a game? And because my son was quite young at the time, we had lots of picture books around us. And the idea came to mind that we could have this style in a picture book. I thought that could be kind of a fun new twist on an action adventure where you're walking around inside the pages. And so I thought this book could be like a 3D object where you kind of turn the pages to find something interesting on the opposite side, or maybe you could turn the book itself and maybe there'd be something printed on the back. And this seemed promising. So I took the idea to Bids, the co-founder, and we were kind of brainstorming the idea. And the idea of surprise, like on every page, something new could present itself, which seemed really fun. And then what would be the ultimate surprise? And we thought the ultimate surprise would be if you could actually jump out of the book and into the 3D world. That could be really kind of jaw-dropping and like a Matrix style twist where you think you know the world, but suddenly it's completely different.
That switch between 2D and 3D really got people's attention, didn't it? I think it was Summer Games Fest 2022, if I'm right, where we first saw that. I did also read, I think it was in Edge magazine, that you were considering keeping the Switch under wraps at one point. What changed your mind there?
Yeah, well, just from a player's point of view, the marketing and developing are always kind of like at odds with each other in a way. Of course, you want to tell people about this cool thing that you've made, but at the same time, you want to keep things a secret for the players so that they can be surprised, because the game's main theme is surprise. If you were being a purist about it, it would be kind of interesting to sell the game to people as a 2D action adventure, and then suddenly the players play it without any prior knowledge and they get kicked out of the book and they're suddenly walking around the desk. You can imagine if we never told anyone about that, from tomorrow, people would suddenly see this amazing twist and it would be quite, hopefully, a word of mouth kind of a thing. But at the same time, you do want to get people excited and interested. And so it made sense to kind of reveal that twist or that surprise. And so we organized the first trailer all around that twist and that premise of Jot jumping out of the book. And the trailer did its job really well. Like people responded with excitement, and it was really fun watching reactions on YouTube of people watching the trailer and then coming to that point and like getting quite excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's just evidence of having a real kind of distinctive hook and how important that is these days. Certainly in a game showcase where sometimes things can look quite similar if you're being uncharitable. And I think the response to that, even though it sounds like you were confident you had a good idea, must have surprised even you, just the sort of the volume of it and the intensity of it. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was more than we expected in a great way. You always kind of hope for the best, that people will be blown away. But I've done things previously where it's like, well, people will really respond to that, and you release it and it's like, oh, not quite so much. Or you never quite know. You never quite know until you put something in front of people how they're going to respond. And so we really hoped that people would get excited. And they did even more than we expected, which was exciting for us, and it becomes motivating. That's one thing that I learned on Pokemon to a greater degree. If people are excited about what you're working on, it's quite motivating. Like art, if you're drawing for yourself, that's great. But if you're doing something in the commercial realm, you're doing it to be enjoyed by other people. And like the more people are excited for what you're making, and the greater the amount of people excited for what you're doing, the more kind of energy that feeds into the project. And it's like quite a positive reinforcement.
Yeah, and I guess with excitement comes expectation, and you did sort of hold the game back a bit, didn't you? Which I understand was more for polishing. You've said elsewhere. I did wonder, was that a difficult conversation with Devolver, your publisher, asking to delay the game, or were they quite good about it? How did that go?
Both, yeah. It was a difficult conversation to have, but they were very understanding about it. I think they're really a creator first kind of publisher, which is great. And they've been understanding all the way through the development, the process, like whatever you guys need to get this game done to the standard you want, within reason, of course, we're there to support you, which has been really great. But at the same time, you don't want to mess up everyone's plans. Like, we all have a plan. This is when the game will finish. This is when it will launch. You don't want to divert the train away from that track. But at some point, it's like, well, does this game need more time? Do we need more polish? Yes. The answer is yes. And in that case, you come to another branch. Okay, so do we be quiet about that and continue as we are? Or do we raise this and see if there's something we can do about it? And then the answer is obviously we should raise it and talk about it. So it becomes like a series of branching decisions, and then it's uncomfortable, but so what, in a way? Like, discomfort is just something you have to deal with in any walk of life and in development. You just have to do what's right each step of the way, and then hopefully you can work things out. And in this case, we did.
Wasn't it good to hear? It sort of runs counter to maybe what the image of those developer and publisher conversations are sometimes like. So yeah, great. And just on another point, and you've spoken about your background working within companies. You and John, your co-founder, you've sort of set up a remote studio here. From what I understand, you're in the UK and John's in Australia, and then you've got a team all over the world. Just tell us a little bit about how that's all worked, because it sounds quite interesting, possibly challenging, but also has its advantages, I'm sure.
Yeah. If you kind of think about it, then it does seem like a big challenge, but it has been really quite natural and not such a big deal. You kind of wonder what the counterexample would be like if we had all worked in a studio together. How would that have been different? Maybe it would have been, or Jonathan, he's in Australia and I'm in England, and so we had to work remotely. But we're really good friends. Like, we've been great friends for such a long time that we just find it very natural to kind of work, even if it's kind of a remote situation. And so when we were creating the demo for the Plucky Squire, no problem at all. Just texting each other, messaging each other on Slack, showing the other what we'd been doing, very easygoing, just gradually forming this thing. And then after that, we started getting more people on board, and everyone's just a cool person. So it's really quite easygoing. And I think that's one thing about a studio. As long as the people who join your studio are just cool people who, there's no drama and easy to get along with, then at least from our experience, it doesn't cause that much of a problem. The fact that you're remote, everyone's just aiming for the same thing. We're all on the same page, no pun intended. And the time zones can be a bit tricky, especially we found as we get towards the end of development, like, okay, we found this bug, this needs fixing by this time. As time becomes more critical, the time zones do cause a bit of a problem, but it's not anything we can't work around. And so the overall experience has been, because it's just a group of really chill and easy to work with people, it's just been fairly easy. No major roadblocks, really.
Awesome. That sounds lovely. It's lovely to hear that it has been smooth. And Jet, I'm just going to squeeze one more question in. I'm just mindful that I'm going to have to jump out of this studio
Sure.
in not quite soon. But just on where you've landed with the release of the Plucky Squire, it seems that you are coming in the middle of a lot of conversations off the back of Astrobot's release, the announcement of the PS5 Pro. These are debates that have always been around in gaming about length of games, gameplay versus graphics and nostalgia. Do you feel like that has or could possibly work in the Plucky Squire's favour sort of landing in the midst of all that? Because it seems to be an example of so many things people say that they've been missing or are looking for.
Yeah, for sure. The reception for Astrobot has been really great to see. I actually know someone in the team, the lead animator of Astrobot, and been talking to him a bit, and he said that the team is over the moon about the response, which is really cool. And it's kind of in the same ballpark as what we're doing, in that it's kind of a positive, family-friendly kind of a game, and usually that's the domain of Nintendo, I think, or has been up until now. I mean, of course, there are exceptions to that, but that's their territory in a way. But I think the desire for those kind of games are definitely there as an alternative to those kind of AAA, more serious, darker kind of games. It's just nice to have like a broader palette of games that some people can enjoy that kind of game, other people might enjoy that. Or, the same person, maybe they're going to feel the need to play something darker one day, something more fun and breezy the other day. So it does feel like, from what I've been seeing, there is a demand and kind of a need for that kind of thing. And I'm glad that we're kind of there, this bright and breezy, colourful game to hand to those people.